suicide forest they call it. For generations, people in Japan have known to be cautious when entering Aokigahara at the skirts of Mount Fuji. The silence in this forest is deafening, the trees rising, reaching the sky, and enclosing you in a perpetual twilight. Their twisted roots coming out of the ground in a maze of wood, moss, and a thick mist full of memory and anguish. The worn out paths tell of heavy steps, slow walks that go nowhere and never turn back, like quiet witness to their tragic stories. This forest has been the subject of fascination for centuries, with a long history of disappearances, which the locals know well. But the strange part is, nobody knows why so many people get the intense feeling, almost like a call from within the forest, to end their life in Aokigahara, in complete solitude, surrounded by trees and deep silence. Nobody knows why so many people decide to enter it and never go back. Aokigahara Forest, often called the Sea of Trees, extends for roughly 8,000 acres at the northwestern part of Mount Fuji, on the island of Honshu in Japan. It is surrounded on its western edge by a vast cave system that fills up with ice every winter. Its winding trails are surrounded by miles of thickly packed trees, making it impossible to see more than a couple hundred feet to each side and through the trail. The sky is rarely visible and completely black at night, with an atmosphere that is almost suffocating. With the constant feeling of not being alone, while walking through a thick maze of roots and unkept roads that go deep into nothing. Nothing but trees lining up and opening as you walk by. It is very difficult to tell the never-ending lines of trees apart. The scenery repeats itself over and over. No signs, no reference, only trees, roots, moss and rocks front and back. Visitors could be walking for hours and note no difference on the road, unsure if going back would be useful or even possible. Walking gets heavier with every step, every breath made difficult by an all-surrounding mist. These trails are very old and unkept, and often disappear entirely, only to reappear a couple of feet later, inviting one to walk into the forest. Signs are often misplaced, and many trails are dead ends. In Aokigahara, silence does not feel like an absence, but like something sustained, present, pressing from all sides. It does not lift, it does not break, until it does. Some describe their names being called. Others mention movement between the trees. But something that is very real and tangible are the objects left behind by those who chose not to return. Ribbons can often be found tied to nearby trees going into the forest, and following them is heavily warned against. Some of the people who decide to end their lives in Aokigahara often leave trail marking ribbons in the journey to the depths of the forest, either to find their way back in case they change their mind, or to help those who will end up finding their remains. It is not rare for trekkers to find personal articles, shoes neatly placed against the tree, journals, books, camping tents, the occasional jacket placed carefully on some branch, as if to prevent it from getting wrinkled, as if that mattered. In 1961, Seiko Matsumoto released the novel The Tower of Waves, which is a psychological crime story that follows a man who becomes deeply fixated on a woman whose life is shaped by secrecy. The tone grows increasingly bleak, emphasizing silence, resignation, and emotional distance. The ending takes place in Aokigahara, and the author, already familiar with the forest, chose it deliberately, not for what happens there, but for what the place already suggested. By the time the story ends, the forest feels less like a setting and more like something that was waiting. There were several reported cases of women walking into the forest carrying the novel, only to never be seen again. And in 1974, they even found the remains of a young lady with her head resting on it. In 1993, another publication appeared, one by author Wataru Tsurumi, which more than fiction was recognized as a practical guide, where he listed Aokigahara as an appropriate location. Copies were found amongst belongings recovered from the forest. These cases, and its long history of death, cemented the infamous name Suicide Forest in the collective consciousness. And many Japanese people believe that it's haunted by the spirits of those that have decided to make it their last resting place. In Japanese culture, these spirits are often referred to as yūrei. What had been given a name did not become easier to understand. In the years that followed, the cases continued to accumulate until recovery became routine. Authorities entering the forest became part of the scenery. It became the first place they searched when someone failed to return from the surrounding areas. Signs were installed at the entrances. Visitors were urged to seek help before doing something that cannot be taken back. Messages like these now appear along nearly every trailhead. Periodic searches were organized, and the retrieval of objects just became part of the routine. Despite the efforts, the numbers did not decline. Eventually, the decision was taken to stop publicizing the cases altogether, in hopes of stopping the occurrence. Over time, the forest ceased to be treated as something unusual. It became something that required organization. Routes were established, areas were divided, and responsibilities were assigned. Search efforts began to follow predictable patterns, and reports started to use the same language over and over again. What had once raised questions no longer required an explanation. It was handled through procedure. The presence of authorities in the forest no longer suggested urgency. It became routine. None of these measures changed it or prevented anything. They did not slow the cases down. What had once been unpredictable was now scheduled. What had once been disturbing was processed. The place remained the same. The system just adjusted around it. Something lingers here, whether it has a name or not. It isn't obvious. It settles slowly, a weight in the air that feels out of place, difficult to ignore once noticed. Some speak of faint whispers coming from within the trees, a sound that resembles a human lament or a voice, carrying just enough clarity to make someone turn, only to find nothing there. There are accounts of names being spoken quietly, close enough to feel directed. Others describe movement between the trunks, dark shapes passing through the mist, visible for a moment before disappearing back into it. Not dramatic, just enough to leave doubt behind. Some mention the sensation of being accompanied. They report hearing footsteps, following them into the forest. But once they stop to check, there is nothing there, only the trees and a vast sea of solitude. And then there are the discoveries that require no interpretation. The most unsettling part are not the ghosts, the whispers, nor the steps that follow when you're not looking. The most unsettling part is finding the personal belongings of those who have walked in, seeking solace from the pain of existence, seeking to leave behind the unbearable weight resting on their shoulders. For some people, the forests represent just a macabre footnote in the history of Japan. For others, Aokigahara is not something that can be reduced to numbers, or novels, or procedures put in place to contain it. There is a point, somewhere beyond the marked trails, where the forest feels less like a location, and more like a presence that has endured too much. The air carries a stillness that does not feel empty, it feels occupied. Some describe a feeling, a calling of sorts, not as a command, not as a voice clearly heard, but as a quiet shift in intention. A moment when continuing forward feels easier than turning back. A step taken involuntarily, then another. There is no clear threshold, no dramatic crossing, just a gradual surrender to depth. Standing there, surrounded by trees that have witnessed so much death and grief, it becomes difficult to separate atmosphere from memory. The ground holds on to so many stories. The branches kept quiet, and silence in Aokigahara has learned to remain intact, no matter what unfolds beneath them. And perhaps that is where the unease settles. Because if a place can accumulate so much sorrow without breaking, without changing its expression, without offering explanation, then it begins to feel patient. It begins to feel welcoming to those who feel that they have nowhere else to go and nowhere to return to. Suicide forest, they call it. Most of the people who go in never mean to get out, and still, they enter.